Community Corner is a program that highlights the contributions of volunteer organizations, groups like the American Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, and Crime Stoppers. These are the sorts of groups where people don't get involved because they want to make any money, but they want to make a difference. So if you have like the wind coming off the ocean, which is what it mostly does around here, you could generate power. But if we get a Santa Ana condition, for instance, that comes off the desert going out to the ocean, you could simply turn your equipment around and take advantage of that.
We can do that, or again, we could actually make it stationary on the top of a building and design the unit so that it's bi-directional.
So that actually sounds rather brilliant. If you set something like that, what percentage of the energy do you estimate you could supply just using free wind power?
Well, technically you could do 100%.
That's
and if you
impressive.
combine it with photovoltaic and you combine it with stationary hydrogen, you definitely could have those numbers. The trick to it is, and there's two ways of doing it. You either create an energy storage system, and there's several of those out there, and that technology is emerging, or you take your excess energy and you have a contract with a power company and you bank those credits and then you draw it back down later.
So you could like sell it to other areas.
Sell it to other areas. You could sell it back to the power company. They're going to pay the base wholesale rate. They're not going to pay the retail rate for it. But you could sell your excess back into the system for credits.
Now, would there be any problems with something like this, in the sense that people would see them as ugly and maybe marring our views or something like that?
Well, again, that is an obvious impediment or problem with the old technology, and that was taken into consideration. As I mentioned, ours are in a cowling, and they can be put up in such a fashion that they would be no more obtrusive than a rooftop heating and air conditioning system.
Well, that sounds like you've looked at a lot of the different problems. Now, how long has your organization been around?
Well, this particular organization formalized some of these guys. In fact, one of the engineers, it was funny, he's very close to retirement, and after putting in, let's just say, lots and lots of years into engineering, that was part of his thesis when he went to university in the late 50s and the 60s.
Huh.
So the guys have been around a long time. We formalized as an organization in April of 2007.
So it's been, as an organization, what, almost 3 years now?
Yeah.
And you're a nonprofit, right? Mm-hmm. And you say you've got this technology.
Oh, wait, I apologize. It'd be April of 2006, because we have been around. This last April was our 3rd year.
Okay,
yeah.
So your 3rd year as a nonprofit. How can people learn more about your organization, or how can they help out?
Well, I can give you our phone number. And it is 307-215-9243. Or they can go to American Western Technologies. We work with them, and that's a .com, or awtgroup.org. And they can send us an email, and we certainly will respond to that. They deal with all of the technologies. In fact, they deal with technologies that we probably will never get around to talking about today, but they're heavily involved in renewable energies. That's the focus of that particular organization.
So do you see wind technology as actually the once it's perfected and implemented, the solution to our energy problems, or is it just one of several different legs that would be utilized to solve our energy problems?
I think it's one of several. I think there are ways to deliver power for a need for wind energy. It definitely could be used in a rural setting, could be used in a third world setting. I think that there are things that are a lot less intrusive that could be used in a metropolitan setting. One thing about wind is you have lots of open space in the Midwest, and if you populated it and created a grid system that could handle it, you wouldn't need any other fuel in the U.S. You could run it all off of wind. That's a proven fact and shows up in the press regularly. But I think that there are things that can be done with stationary hydrogen combined with different photovoltaic systems that in a metropolitan setting, that would really be all that you would need.
I've seen more and more buildings with solar panels and things like that attached to them. So there does seem to be more of an awareness towards the need to reach out to new energy forms.
Right. Well, the nice thing about solar is that there's lots of it. Think of watering a 6-inch potted plant with a fire hose. And that's what solar basically does. There's lots of it. There's spillover effect. There have come out with some newer materials that allow for greater absorption. In other words, they've created materials that are blacker than black, so they've increased the absorption. But at the beginning of the year, MIT had done a study, and they released the results at the beginning of the year, and your production, the amount of energy that's actually produced by solar is about 6.7%. Whereas in the old 3-blade wind, you're in the 20 percentile. If you use a wind turbine like our guys developed, you can actually get your productivity levels up into the 80 percentiles.
Whoa, so that makes it far more efficient.
Solar's not really efficient, but again, think of that analogy of watering a 6-inch plant with a fire hose. There's lots of water. And yeah, you're losing a lot of water. There's a lot of water you're not capturing. It's just running off. But that's what you're getting with solar. And solar, the solar films, being able to get a thinner film, a lower profile. But at the end of the day, until those efficiencies get up there, it's always going to be limited by the amount of surface space that you have available.
Of course, my question is the use of nuclear power. Could that solve our energy needs? The only problem we seem to have is the disposal of the leftover product of one fashion or another. But I've read that France gets up to 80% of their electrical power grid right off of nuclear energy. Is there any way that we could improve our nuclear technology? Maybe that could be at least a stopgap.
Well, there needs to be, from our perspective, there needs to be more in cleaning up that technology. There have been big advances in the disposal of the nuclear waste. There's been advances in the ability to reuse the spent nuclear waste. But at the end of the day, I really think with hydrogen, advances in solar, which have no waste to deal with, wind, which have no waste to deal with, I think that it would be back trying to clean up coal so you could create some kind of fuel to run a car that would spew emissions out the tailpipe. I think that I don't think it's worthy of pursuit because of the inherent problems. There's a lot of other ways to do it that are cleaner, and you don't have the problems if you have a rupture, like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and all these things. If a solar panel breaks, you have a small contained problem that's minimal, that doesn't even rate the radar screen. And it's the same with the stationary hydrogen. It just continues to, it just stops functioning. It doesn't continue to have a spillover product or problem. Where I'm thinking, or my mind is going, is it's racing in the other direction. The only impediment currently is in stationary hydrogen, if you want to do a storage. They're still working on some storage issues there. But there's no reason that you can't use hydrogen on demand. I mean, hydrogen on demand has been around since prior to the Civil War.
It's interesting. A lot of people are saying that the way of the future will be towards electric cars.
Right.
And
VW has a fabulous unit that's coming out.
We've had electric cars since Thomas Edison.
Right.
You know, and I think his friend Bailey produced an electric car which could reach the maximum speed of, I think, 22 miles an hour, which wasn't so bad in 1900.
Right.
Greater than a guy riding a horse, I suppose. But electric cars, would that impact the grid that we now have? And could wind technology actually produce enough power to feed the need to run all of our automobiles with electricity instead of gasoline?
Oh, absolutely. The problem isn't in the amount of power that we can produce. The problem is, and I think before we got started on the show, we had kind of gotten to this point. My favorite example is Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, in Caracas. They provide the east coast of the United States with the world's cleanest burning coal, thanks to American technology. They are an oil exporter, largest in the region. But in Caracas, they have rolling blackouts. So the problem is always, and has and will be until we invest in it, is the infrastructure. It's the grid. The grid's the problem. You can produce all this power and all this open space, but getting it to where the people are, because we haven't kept up with updating our grid system.
So I've read that before, that our grid is very shaky. And there have been instances we all know about where massive power failure could knock several states out, or the case of a Katrina-like disaster, you could have whole areas without electricity for weeks.
Yes.
And we need electricity for our computers and all of our modern tools of our technology. Not having electricity would be, well, almost as bad as some sort of Pearl Harbor, because we would be, well, out of business.
Well, there's two major schools of thought, and I don't think the twain shall ever meet. There's the group that very strongly advocates a national grid system, and they firmly believe that that's the best way to protect America. And then you have the group that believes in micro and mini grid systems, and they don't mind a connectivity to a national grid system, but they're trying to create it so that there's smaller areas that can be energy independent, and therefore want to rely on things like solar and wind and stationary hydrogen, so that if you had a disaster like that, you wouldn't have such massive blackouts.
So it wouldn't be a cascade effect where whole areas get blanked out. But in fact, being independent, small areas like one for Ventura County, we're using wind turbine or hydrogen or even solar, that would insulate us from any of these larger disasters that might inundate the state or even the entire western seaboard.
Right. And our guys tend to think in those terms, but the government and the general thinking is they're desperately trying towards centralization. But I think that, as you just pointed out, with a central system, and we've already had it happen, you get something that goes wrong and everybody gets hurt.
Yeah. It's like the old analogy of the snake. You just cut off its head and it's dead.
Right.
But if you have a bunch of smaller independent situations, it would be much more difficult to kind of destroy it.
Well, the idea is that with a national system that all for one, one for all, we all benefit or we all get hurt. So